They said his hands were too old, too broken to matter. But in Dry Mesa, Texas, when a red Tesla broke down in the middle of nowhere, laughter filled the air. Ranchers in their shiny F-250s pointed and jeered, certain no one could bring that car back to life. The woman behind the wheel hid her anger behind dark glasses, trapped between pride and helplessness. And just as hope seemed gone, a figure appeared through the dust, an elderly black man pushing a rusty cart of tools, 3 fingers missing from his left hand. Earl Carter didn't speak like an engineer, didn't dress like one either. But when he said, "An engine's an engine. A hot heart just needs calm and water," the desert went quiet. None of them knew that this moment would spark a fight bigger than any car. A fight to bring light to a forgotten town. Dry Mesa wore the evening like a bruise. Purple on the horizon, rust red at the road's edge, wind teasing grit into everyone's teeth. The red Tesla sat with its hood up, a glossy stranger in cattle country. Heat shimmered off the metal like it wanted to peel the paint. Helen Vasquez kept her sunglasses on even as the light faded. Not for the sun, but for the eyes around her. She had a calm, corporate face she'd practiced in boardrooms, blank, polite, untouchable. It didn't work so well with dust and ridicule. "Should have brought a real truck," Buck Rawlins called, thumbs hooked into his belt. He had a neat mustache and the kind of smile that came out only when someone else was struggling. 2 men laughed behind him from the shadows of a lifted F-250. "Your motor's never gonna run," another voice added. Helen set her phone against the sky again, hunting for a single bar. Nothing. Silence bloomed around her, right up until the squeak of a cartwheel cut through the laughter. Earl Red Carter eased out of the haze, pushing a dented service cart whose drawers stuck halfway. He was tall and long in the bone, with shoulders that had carried more weight than they should. His left hand looked like a work order someone forgot to finish. Ring finger, pinky, and half the middle gone. Grease tattooed the lines of his other palm like a map. He wore a torn cap that had once been blue. "Evening," Earl said, voice low as gravel. "Mind if I take a look?" Buck tossed his head. "Ain't no carburetor in that spaceship, old man." "True enough," Earl said, not blinking. "But a hot heart's a hot heart, no matter if it's got pistons or lithium." Helen surprised herself. "Please," she said, stepping aside. It started screaming, then lost power. Error code popped and died. Earl leaned in without ceremony. He listened, actually listened, the way people do with babies and secrets. He touched the radiator bottle, sniffed the steam, checked a hose, traced a cable. He moved slow because slow was careful, and careful gets you home. Hank Dillard, the hardware store owner, crossed his arms like he was owed money by the whole county. "You fry that computer, you'll buy a new one, old-timer." Earl didn't look up. "Lady, you got water." Helen handed over a half-empty metal bottle. Earl poured a trickle across a section of hose and watched it bead. He frowned, then nodded to himself. He pulled a short length of clear tubing from his cart, looked like it belonged on a fridge, and a tiny packet of epoxy. People snorted. Dr. Clay Morton stepped forward, wearing a clean plaid and cleaner boots. He was the kind of consultant who swallowed buzzwords like vitamins. "This is inappropriate intervention. The manufacturer specifies certified roadside support due to risk thresholds and thermal runaway scenarios." Earl dabbed epoxy, fitted tubing like a vein graft. "Risk threshold is folks getting stuck at sundown on a road coyotes know by first name." Buck chuckled. "Hear that, Doc? Coyote certified repair." Ryan Pierce arrived on the tail end of the joke. Fresh haircut, white hard hat still in his truck. He worked for the wind company that ran the ridge above Dry Mesa and wore it like a badge. "What's going on?" "Field surgery," Hank said. "On a car that thinks it's a computer." Ryan peered in, then sighed. "This is not compliant. That's not an OEM part." Earl straightened. "It's a tube that doesn't leak and a clamp that doesn't quit. Now let her rest 2 minutes." People shifted. Some looked annoyed they weren't being entertained anymore. The heat hushed. A meadowlark tried a note and gave up. 2 minutes later, Earl wiped his hands on a rag so stained it couldn't remember its first color. He motioned to Helen. "Crank it gentle." She slid in, breath tight in her ribs. The screen pulsed. The car hummed, thought about quitting, and then settled. A clean, soft purr, like a cat warming a porch rail. The laughter didn't so much stop as fall off a cliff. A couple of the men suddenly found reasons to check their boots. Helen exhaled. She took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were dark and sharp. "How much do I owe you?" Earl shook his head. "You don't. I just hate the sound of folks stuck." She stared at him. "Let me pay you for your time." "Tell you what," Earl said, and there was a glint that didn't quite match the wear in his voice. "Give me 10 minutes. I'll show you something nobody around here wants to see." Buck barked a laugh. "If it's your pension, we all seen it." Earl smiled without teeth. "Not that. Light." He nudged his cart toward the old feed store across from Hank's place. A long, low building with boards gone gray and a tin roof that pinged when the wind changed. Helen followed, curiosity beating back her caution. The crowd trailed too because people like a show even when they claim they don't. Inside the feed store, the air was cooler, almost sweet with old grain. In an open bay, spread across sawhorses and a battered workbench, lay a tangle of things that looked like they'd been rescued from 3 centuries at once. Bicycle rims trued to silver, PVC stubs, a gutted alternator from a Chevy that had done its dying 20 years ago, a fan hub from something big. "Made this for the wind we get down here," Earl said. "Not the ridge wind those big boys drink. Ours is stubborn, low and lazy most days, then mean as a mule when it stands up." Hank snorted. "Looks like trash." Earl tapped a blade, thin, curved metal cut from an industrial fan, edges dressed smooth by hours of quiet work. "Angle of attack ain't a guess. She bites just enough at 6 miles an hour and doesn't stall till 20. Bearings are sealed from my turbine days. Learned the hard way. Sand eats everything it loves." Ryan leaned closer, searching for an easy flaw. "Your cabling is undersized. That alternator won't regulate properly without—" "I built a buck converter off an old inverter," Earl said, pointing to a small box with a heatsink riveted on. "Not pretty. Pretty is for catalogs." "How many volts?" Ryan asked despite himself. "Enough to wake a porch and keep a fridge whispering. Not gonna run a hot tub, son. Just lights and a fan when the lines go dead like they do." Dr. Clay cleared his throat. "There are grid considerations, liability, certification. It's inadvisable." Buck folded his arms. "And who's paying for any of this? Folks around here can't afford dreams." Earl shrugged. "We afford candles. We afford Hank's quiet little markups on generators every storm that comes." Hank's face flushed. "You better watch it." "Have you ever been treated like this?" Helen said suddenly, voice low. "Talked over, laughed at for trying. If you have, write it in the comments." She caught herself, a habit from a life spent pitching and posting. But the words fit here. Earl scratched behind his ear, embarrassed by the attention. "I ain't asking for money. I'm asking for 10 minutes of wind." Outside, the air had settled into that coppery, calm, dry mesa knew well, the kind that could turn into a gust without warning. Earl lugged the light frame outside, set it on a short mast he'd welded to a base plate. He wired a small LED strip to the output, shoved the converter into the shade, and whispered to the blades like they were a skittish colt. Ryan checked the anemometer clipped to his truck mirror. 3, maybe 4 miles per hour. "Stubborn wind," Earl said. "My favorite kind." For a few seconds nothing happened, and Buck's grin returned like a stain coming back through paint. "Told you, trash." The blades trembled, found a hold, and turned. Slow at first, then a touch quicker. The LED hiccuped, blinked, went dark, then glowed. Not bright, not billboard bright, but steady and honest. The kind of light that makes a kitchen less lonely. No one spoke. The ridgeline turbines were spinning fast, feeding Amarillo and beyond. But down here a small miracle lit a strip of cheap diodes. Ryan swallowed. "What angle did you set those blades at?" Earl showed him, thumb and forefinger measuring air. "Here, where stubborn wind lives." Helen's face changed, something soft and fierce waking up. She looked at Earl the way people look at doors they didn't know they needed. Doctor. Clay regained his voice. You cannot install unregulated devices on private properties without a... Regulations are for folks who already have light, Earl said gently. We're just asking for a start. Buck scuffed his boot. Start my foot. You touch my property with that junk and I'll... The wind shifted. Earl's light flickered, then steadied again. He took a breath like he'd been holding it since the ridge first sprouted white towers years back. Helen, he said, turning from the glowing strip. I ain't asking for much. Just a week. 10 men, 10 hands. I can build 20 of these, maybe more. She looked past him at the ridge, the corporate farm of wind, then at the faces of dry mesa, which were tired in ways money doesn't fix. A week. She echoed softly. And a place to work, Earl added. Big enough to lay out a line. Buck's old feedlot. Buck stepped in so close Earl could smell his cologne under the dust. Over my dead body. Buck, Helen said, voice cool for the first time. Name a price, he smirked. Double what it's worth. Done, she said, and Buck's smirk faltered. But Hank wasn't done. And where you getting cable? Regulators? Bearings? From the charity ferry? Earl glanced at his cart, then at the men, then at Helen. I can show you the supply list. If we stop arguing, we can light up someone's living room before Sunday. He nodded toward the ridge again. If we wait for policy, dry mesa stays dark. Ryan followed the LED's glow with his eyes, jaw tight. He wanted to say no. He also wanted to know how the old man had made Low Wind his friend. He opened his mouth, and 3 sheriff cruisers rolled up, dust lighting red and blue in the last of the sun. A deputy stepped out, hand resting on his belt. We got a call about unlicensed equipment and trespass on commercial property. Helen froze. Earl's shoulders dipped just an inch, space enough for a doubt to slip in. The LED burned on like it didn't know better. Ma'am, the deputy said to Helen, I'm going to need everyone to step away from the device. Earl looked at Maya, who had slipped from the doorway with a spiral notebook hugged to her chest, and then at Helen. I told you, he murmured. Some folks don't want to see the light. The deputy took another step. The red and blue strobes painted the feed store walls, turning every shadow sharp. Dust still floated in the air, glowing like smoke in the flashing lights. Earl stood with his hands loose at his sides, palms open, as if he had nothing left to hide. Helen adjusted her blazer, forcing herself to look composed, though her chest was tight. The deputy's voice was steady, but carried that edge of authority small towns know well. Mr. Carter, folks here say you're setting up unauthorized equipment. That true? Buck Rawlins was quick to jump in, grinning like he'd already won. Sure is, deputy. Old man's got some junk spinning out here. Dangerous. Could catch fire, cut somebody's hand clean off. Earl didn't flinch. What's dangerous is folks sitting in the dark while power lines break down every other storm. The deputy glanced at the LED strip, still glowing faintly. It wasn't much, just a band of light. But in that tense silence, it felt louder than any voice. Helen stepped forward. Deputy, my name is Helen Vasquez. I'll take full responsibility for this demonstration. No laws were broken. We're not selling power. Just testing. The deputy shifted, uneasy. Ma'am, I respect that, but I've got orders. Complaint came from Hank's Hardware. Says there's unlicensed distribution gear here. Liability risk. Hank folded his arms, chin high. Regulations exist for a reason. Ryan Pierce, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. His voice carried the caution of someone torn between protocol and curiosity. Deputy, technically he's right. This device doesn't meet safety standards. But, he hesitated, eyes on Earl. The design's functional. I haven't seen a turbine capture low wind like this. It's impressive. Buck scoffed. Don't butter him up, Ryan. He's a backyard tinkerer, not an engineer. Sometimes, Ryan said carefully, experience is worth more than degrees. That line hung in the air. The deputy looked between them, weighing whether to push harder. Finally, he blew out a sigh. Look, I'm writing this up as a warning. Shut it down tonight. If I come back and see blades spinning again, You'll both answer in Amarillo." He tipped his hat toward Earl and Helen. Evening. When the cruisers rolled away, silence pressed heavier than before. Buck smirked, already turning toward his truck. "Told you it wouldn't last. Old man's good for parlor tricks, nothing more." Helen stepped in his path. "You're wrong." Her voice was firm, no trace of the nerves she felt inside. Buck tilted his head, amused. "Lady, you don't know this town. Out here, people don't back losers." She didn't blink. "Out here, people also know the dark, and when they see light, they'll follow it." Buck sneered, muttering under his breath as he climbed into his truck. Hank followed, whispering about lawsuits. Dr. Clay trailed behind, mumbling non-compliant, inadvisable, like a mantra. Only Ryan stayed. Earl bent to dismantle the rig, his movements slow but steady. Maya, his granddaughter, crept out of the doorway and touched his elbow. "Grandpa, did we lose?" Earl looked down at her, her wide eyes, notebook clutched to her chest, pages filled with sketches of blades and arrows. He managed a smile. "Not yet, darling. Not yet." Helen crouched to meet the girl's gaze. "What are you drawing there?" Maya hesitated, then opened the notebook. Pages filled with childlike but clever diagrams. Towers drawn in pencil, blades curved like petals, little houses with glowing yellow windows. "Grandpa says every home deserves its own son." Helen's chest tightened. She looked at Earl. "How long would it take, really, to build 20 of these?" Earl wiped sweat from his forehead with a rag. "1 week. If I had a place to work, enough hands. And the parts Hank keeps locked in his store." Ryan folded his arms, troubled. "Even if we built them, distribution is a nightmare. Legalities aside, people will push back." Helen rose, brushing dirt from her knees. "Then we stop asking permission." Earl studied her face. She wasn't bluffing. That boardroom calm was cracking, and underneath it was something fiercer. "Why?" Earl asked quietly. "Why would a woman with money and choices fight for Dry Mesa?" Helen's eyes flicked to the ridge, where the white giants spun against the fading sky. "Because I've built things for people who already had everything, and I'm done with that." Ryan shook his head, pacing. "You're risking more than money, Helen. If corporate finds out, they already will," she said flatly. "I'm their CEO." The words hit the room like a hammer. Earl froze. Maya's mouth fell open. Even Ryan looked stunned. "You're what?" Earl whispered. "I own the park on the ridge," Helen said, voice steady now. "But I'm here tonight as myself. And I'm telling you, I'm not leaving Dry Mesa in the dark. You give me your designs, Earl. I'll give you everything else." Ryan ran a hand through his perfect hair, torn between admiration and panic. "This could get me fired." Earl looked at him, eyes narrowed but kind. "Or it could make you a man worth remembering." Helen extended her hand toward Earl. He hesitated only a moment before gripping it with the strength of someone who still believed in work. 3 fingers or not, the handshake felt like a pact. In the distance, the turbines spun for the cities. But in that moment, in a dusty feed store under cheap LED light, a different kind of power hummed into life. One built on stubborn wind, old scars, and promises made in silence. And none of them knew yet how much Dry Mesa would fight back. Dry Mesa woke the next morning to gossip hotter than the desert sun. By sunrise, half the town already knew that Helen Vasquez, the woman with the Tesla, wasn't just another outsider. She was the CEO of the company that owned the ridge. Some folks whispered it like a miracle, others like a curse. At the feed store, Earl Carter pulled open the bay doors, the hinges screeching like they hadn't moved in years. Sunlight spilled across his half-finished turbine, dust motes swirling like stars. He had slept little, head buzzing with plans, hands aching with the old ache that came from years of lifting things heavier than men should. Maya was already sketching on the concrete floor, chalking out blade angles and scrawling numbers she half understood. Helen arrived in work boots and jeans instead of her blazer, the change startling even Earl. "Couldn't sleep," she admitted. "Too many voices in my head telling me not to do this." She smiled thinly. "So here I am anyway." Ryan followed behind, tie gone, sleeves rolled. He looked less like a corporate engineer and more like a kid dragged into something bigger than himself. I'm here because if you're really going to do this, you'll need at least one person who speaks the same language as the regulators. And because, he paused, because I saw that light last night. It shouldn't have worked, but it did. Earl gave him a nod. Sometimes things that shouldn't work are the ones worth fighting for. Before they could get far, Buck Rawlins stormed in with Hank and Dr. Clay at his side. Buck's voice boomed through the old store. You think you can steal my property and start your little science fair in here? Think again. Helen didn't flinch. I already bought the building. The paperwork's filed. Buck blinked, caught off guard. You, what? Check with the county clerk, Helen said smoothly. As of this morning, the deed is in my name. This feed store is now the future site of Dry Mesa Technical Cooperative. Maya clapped her chalk-dusted hands together, grinning. Earl just shook his head in wonder. Hank, red-faced, stepped forward. And what about the parts? You can't build turbines out of thin air. You'll need cables, inverters, bolts, and I control all of that. Helen's eyes hardened. Then maybe we buy them from Amarillo, or maybe we don't need you at all. That's theft of local business, Hank snapped. It's survival, Earl shot back, his voice like a hammer on steel. Dr. Clay lifted his chin. None of this will stand. The corporate board will crush this project the moment they hear about it. Helen stepped closer, her words cold and precise. I am the board, and I'm done watching men like you profit from keeping communities small and weak. For a moment, silence filled the feed store. Then Buck spat on the floor. You'll regret crossing me. He stormed out, Hank on his heels, Dr. Clay muttering about liabilities and lawsuits. Their trucks roared away, leaving only dust and tension. Ryan let out a breath. That was reckless. Helen smiled grimly. Maybe, but necessary. By noon, Earl had gathered a handful of neighbors curious enough, or desperate enough, to lend their hands. They hammered old metal, stripped wires, re-welded frames. Helen set up a folding table with laptops, running numbers and drawing out schedules. Ryan worked quietly beside Earl, slowly losing the stiffness in his shoulders as he asked questions instead of giving orders. Maya darted between them all, handing tools, pointing to her chalk diagrams, correcting men twice her size with the certainty only a child can carry. But whispers grew louder outside. Buck and Hank weren't done. They spent the afternoon spreading fear, telling ranchers the turbines would catch fire, telling storekeepers they'd lose business, warning everyone that Helen was here to steal land. That evening, Earl walked home under a bruised sky, carrying the weight of it all. His tiny house sat on the edge of town, porch light flickering, roof patched more times than he could count. Inside, Maya stirred beans on the stove. You're tired, she said simply. Earl smiled faintly. Always am. He sat at the table, rubbing his missing fingers with the other hand. Feels like pushing a boulder uphill, baby girl. She looked at him, eyes bright. But you taught me. Stubborn wind can turn blades. You just have to wait for it. Her words settled deep in his chest, stronger than any blueprint. The next day, when the first prototype finally stood tall in the dusty lot behind the store, a small crowd gathered. The tower wasn't much, just scrap metal and weld scars, but its blades gleamed in the harsh sun. Earl tightened the last bolt, sweat dripping down his temple. Helen wiped her palms on her jeans. Ryan held the anemometer steady. Maya stood clutching her notebook, eyes wide. Moment of truth, Earl muttered. The wind teased the blades, nudged them, spun them once. A second gust came, steadier, and the turbine began to turn. The LED strip wired to its core blinked, once, twice, and then glowed bright. The crowd gasped. Some cheered. Others whispered nervously, unsure if they were witnessing hope or trouble. And just as the light steadied, a voice rang out from the edge of the lot. Well, well, Buck Rawlins drawled, climbing down from his truck. Looks like the circus is in town, but let's see how long your little miracle lasts when the law comes calling again. Behind him, 2 black SUVs rolled up, corporate logos stamped on the doors. Men in suits stepped out, clipboards in hand. Helen's jaw tightened. Earl wiped his brow. Ryan muttered a curse. The turbine's blades spun on, defiant in the stubborn wind. The black SUVs parked side by side, dust swirling around their polished tires. Out stepped 3 men in pressed suits, their shoes sinking into the dirt with every step. They didn't belong in Dry Mesa. Too clean, too crisp, too sure of themselves. One carried a clipboard, another a tablet, and the third wore a smile so thin it felt like a blade. Helen's stomach tightened. She knew the type. She had once been them. The tallest man, Mr. Grayson, cleared his throat. Ms. Vasquez, or should I say Madam CEO, imagine our surprise finding you here, entertaining a science project. His voice dripped with sarcasm. Do you have any idea how much liability you've created for this company? Helen didn't flinch. I'm not here as your CEO. I'm here as a resident of Dry Mesa. These turbines belong to the people. Grayson gave a sharp laugh. Belong to them? These contraptions? He pointed at Earl's prototype, its blades still spinning lazily in the afternoon wind. The LED glowed steady at its base, as if mocking him. Buck crossed his arms from the sidelines, grinning ear to ear. Told you they wouldn't get far. Earl stepped forward, wiping sweat from his brow with a rag that had seen 100 repairs. Don't need far. Just need enough to keep a light on. A fan running when the heat don't quit. That's all. Grayson didn't even look at him. Sir, step aside. This matter is between Ms. Vasquez and her board. Ryan surprised everyone by speaking up. He's not just some guy, Grayson. Earl built a system that works in low wind, something we haven't managed in years of R&D. You should be taking notes, not shutting him down. Buck barked a laugh. Listen to the kid defending his new hero. Pathetic. Helen turned, eyes blazing. Enough. The word cracked like a whip. We are not shutting this down. The man with the tablet tapped quickly, then looked up. Ms. Vasquez, if you continue, we'll file for immediate injunction. You'll lose your seat, your stock, everything. Her chest rose and fell, but her voice stayed calm. Maybe that's the price. Because this... She gestured at the glowing LED, at the crowd of townsfolk standing behind it. This is worth more than boardroom applause. That night, the feed store buzzed like a hive. Word had spread, and more neighbors came with tools, scrap metal, old parts they'd saved, just in case. Kids carried water jugs, women brought casseroles, men dragged welding rigs and extension cords. Dry Mesa hadn't seen this kind of gathering in years. Earl sat at the center, drawing chalk lines on the concrete while Maya added arrows and notes in her small, determined handwriting. Helen coordinated supplies, her once polished hands now streaked with oil. Ryan translated Earl's experience into schematics, drafting on his laptop with sweat dripping down his forehead. It was chaos. It was messy, but it was alive. Between the hammering and grinding, voices rose. My mom's oxygen machine failed last storm. My boy studies by candlelight. Generators cost more than my mortgage. Every story was another nail driven into Dry Mesa's resolve. By the third night, they had 6 turbines assembled. The crowd gathered again as Earl tightened the last bolt. The wind was fickle, barely whispering through the lot. Please, Maya whispered. Please work. The blades trembled. The LEDs flickered. Then, light. One strip glowed, then another, until the lot shimmered with 6 lines of soft, steady brightness. A cheer erupted, raw and desperate. For the first time in years, Dry Mesa wasn't just watching power from the ridge, it was making its own. But joy was short-lived. Headlights cut through the night as Buck's F-250s rolled up, engines growling. Hank was in the passenger seat, shouting over the roar. You'll burn this whole town down, Hank yelled. This isn't safe. You're gonna kill somebody. Behind them, more trucks pulled in. Not helpers, doubters, neighbors torn between hope and fear. Some whispered agreement with Hank, others clenched fists, unwilling to surrender what they'd just seen. Grayson's SUV pulled up last. He stepped out, Tie loosened now, frustration etched deep. "This ends tonight, Ms. Vasquez. You are ordered to cease and desist immediately. Any further assembly will be met with legal action." Helen stood her ground. Her voice carried over the engines, over the murmurs, over the fear. "If you want to shut this down, you'll have to shut down every one of us." The crowd stilled. Earl's heart pounded. He saw faces shifting, uncertain, scared, but also burning with something stubborn. Maya stepped forward, holding her notebook high. "You can't take our light!" The little girl's voice rang sharper than any threat. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. The turbines spun in the stubborn wind, blades creaking but steady. The LEDs glowed on, defiant, fragile, but unbroken. And in that fragile glow, Dry Mesa made a choice. Silence or resistance. The next morning, the desert carried a strange silence. Not the peaceful kind. This was a silence stretched tight, like a rope about to snap. The turbines behind the feed store still turned, their blades catching the stubborn wind, powering strings of LEDs that glowed through the night. But Earl Carter felt the storm coming, and it wasn't weather. Helen arrived early, a thermos of coffee in her hand. She looked tired but determined. "The board's furious," she admitted. "They're threatening to pull every contract I've signed in the last 5 years." Earl took the coffee, sipping slow. "Then they're scared. Means you're hitting where it hurts." Ryan came in next, phone buzzing non-stop. He set it on the workbench like it was burning his hand. "I've got 20 missed calls, half from corporate, half from my dad." He rubbed his forehead. "He says I'm throwing away my career." "You throw away what wasn't worth keeping," Earl muttered, tightening a bolt. But before they could speak further, Maya burst in, out of breath. "Grandpa, they're cutting the lines!" They rushed outside. At the edge of town, 2 utility trucks idled, workers climbing poles with insulated gloves. A crowd of ranchers stood watching, some angry, some resigned. Buck's F-250 sat parked proudly beside them, Hank leaning against the hood. "They're disconnecting the grid," Helen whispered. Buck's grin widened. "Town's unsafe. Sheriff approved it. Better dark than burned." The lineman clipped a cable, sparks showering the dirt. The crowd gasped. For a heartbeat, Dry Mesa was cut in half, the corporate turbines spinning above, the town below slipping back into shadows. Maya grabbed Earl's hand, eyes wet. "Grandpa, do something!" Earl's chest ached, not from age, but from rage. He stepped forward, voice steady but sharp. "You shut those lines, you kill the people here. Not with fire, but with heat, hunger, and silence. You know it." The sheriff's cruiser pulled up just then, dust curling around it. Deputy Flores stepped out, face conflicted. "Orders are orders, Earl. State safety code." Helen cut in, fierce. "Don't quote codes while children study by candlelight. These turbines are safe. I'll sign every liability myself." Grayson's SUV rolled up behind them. He stepped out, tie gone, sleeves rolled, but his eyes sharp as ever. "No, this ends now. Ms. Vasquez, you're finished." Ryan's hands shook. For once, he raised his voice. "You can't stop this, not anymore. I saw it with my own eyes. Low wind, high yield. Earl cracked something we couldn't." "And you want to bury it?" Grayson sneered. "We bury what threatens profit." The words slipped out too loud, too raw. The crowd heard them, every syllable. Gasps rippled. Even Buck shifted uncomfortably. Earl saw the moment. He stepped to the front, voice rising over the murmurs. "All my life I've been told my hands were worth less than a diploma, that my ideas weren't clean enough, new enough, shiny enough. But look around. These hands lit up your kitchens last night. These hands gave your kids a chance to read after sundown, and I ain't about to let some suit snuff that out." The turbines hummed behind him, stubborn as the wind itself. Maya lifted her notebook, shouting, "We need the light!" Something broke in the crowd. A murmur became a chant. First 2 voices, then 10. Then the whole gathering shouting, "Light! Light! Light!" Grayson's jaw tightened. He barked at the lineman. "Cut it all!" "Now." But the workers hesitated. They weren't board members. They were locals. They had kids in Dry Mesa, too. One climbed down, shaking his head. "Not tonight. Not here." The chant grew louder. Buck's smirk faltered. Hank pulled at his collar, suddenly sweating. Helen stepped up beside Earl. "If you believe experience beats arrogance, give this fight your voice. Tell us in the comments. Tell us right here." The crowd roared agreement. Grayson's eyes narrowed. This isn't over. He stalked back to his SUV, slamming the door. The other executives followed. Tires spun, dust flew, and the vehicles disappeared into the horizon. But Buck stayed. He walked up slow, face twisted with something between anger and shame. "This won't last," he spat. "You can't power a town with scraps." Earl met his eyes. "Maybe not forever, but it starts with one light. And last night, Dry Mesa had 6. Buck didn't reply. He climbed back into his truck, peeled away, gravel scattering under his tires. The crowd broke into applause. Some hugged, others cried. For one night, Dry Mesa had chosen light over fear. Later, under the soft glow of the turbines, Earl sat on the porch of the feed store. Maya curled beside him, asleep with her notebook across her chest. Helen sat across, her face softer than he'd ever seen it. "You know," she said quietly, "this is only the beginning. They'll come back harder." Earl looked out at the glowing LEDs. "Then we'll build harder." Ryan approached, carrying fresh schematics. "Earl, show me that blade angle again. I want to learn it right." The old man smiled, the weight in his chest lifting just a little. Maybe, just maybe, the wind was finally shifting. But deep down he knew. Before light can stay, darkness always makes one last push. The morning after the showdown, Dry Mesa felt different. The air was still dry. The dust still clung to boots and lungs. But something unseen pulsed through the town, like stubborn wind that refused to die. The turbines behind the feed store turned lazily, their LEDs glowing faint even in daylight, proof that scraps could fight back. Earl Carter rose before sunrise, as he always did. His bones complained, but his spirit felt lighter. He shuffled into the feed store, where Helen was already at a folding table surrounded by stacks of papers. She looked up, hair pulled back, eyes tired but alive. "They're coming for me," she said simply. "Board vote tomorrow. They want me out." Earl scratched his chin. "Let 'em. A title ain't light. A paycheck ain't power. This," he gestured to the turbines, "this is." Helen smiled faintly. "Funny. I spent 20 years climbing ladders just to realize the ground matters more." Ryan walked in, a roll of blueprints under his arm. He looked different now, tie gone, sleeves rolled, grease on his hands. He laid the papers on the table, eyes shining. "I reworked the design with Earl's specs. Stronger mounts, safer cabling. If we scale this, we can power 50 homes with basic loads." Helen raised her brows. 50? Maybe more. He hesitated, then added, "I sent the files to a friend in Austin. She wants to feature this at the university's engineering lab. If they back us, we won't just be a town experiment. We'll be a movement." Earl chuckled, shaking his head. "Stubborn wind, stubborn people. Guess we're hard to kill." By midweek, the feed store had transformed. Welding sparks lit the corners, sawdust mixed with dust, children carried water jugs, and neighbors brought in scrap parts. What once was empty space became a humming workshop. Helen stood in the center announcing, "We're calling it the Dry Mesa Cooperative. Every turbine built here will belong to a family here. No middlemen, no markups." Applause rose. Even those who had doubted now raised their voices, because hope is contagious. But not everyone clapped. Buck Rollins stood at the back, arms crossed. His smirk was gone, replaced by something colder, fear. Hank lingered beside him, lips tight. That night, under the cover of dark, Buck and Hank crept to the lot. They carried wire cutters and cans of fuel, whispering curses about pride and power. What they didn't know was that Ryan had stayed late, working quietly under a lamp. He heard the scrape of boots, the hiss of fuel. Buck! Ryan's voice cracked the silence. What the hell are you doing? Buck froze, caught in the lamplight. Saving this town from a scam. Ryan stepped forward. No, you're saving your own pride. You're terrified an old man with 3 fingers and a kid with a notebook just did more for Dry Mesa than you ever did. Hank muttered, Ryan, stay out of this. But neighbors had heard the shouting. Lights flicked on in houses. Within minutes, half the town surrounded the lot. Buck's hand shook on the fuel can. Earl stepped forward, calm but unyielding. Son, Earl said softly, you pour that. You burn not just metal. You burn trust. And that never comes back. The crowd murmured agreement. Buck looked around, realizing he was alone. Slowly, he dropped the can. Hank followed, silent. They slunk away under the heavy weight of eyes that no longer respected them. Days turned into a week. One by one, turbines rose across backyards, porches, and dusty fields. They weren't pretty, not yet, but they spun, and they lit homes that had known too much dark. For the first time, Dry Mesa's nights glowed with steady lamps, refrigerators hummed without fear, and children studied under light that didn't smell of kerosene. On the 8th day, the town gathered for a celebration. Strings of LEDs crisscrossed the main street. People brought food, music played from old speakers, and laughter carried farther than the wind. Helen stood on a small platform, voice ringing clear. Dry Mesa is no longer in the dark. We did this, together, and this is only the beginning. She turned to Earl. From today forward, you are our chief of innovation. This town owes you its light. Applause thundered. Earl looked embarrassed, but Maya tugged his sleeve, eyes shining. Say something, Grandpa. He cleared his throat, voice gravelly but strong. Ain't much to say. Engines are engines. Wind is wind. But when folks stop laughing at each other and start working together, that's when miracles happen. Light's just proof we didn't give up. Ryan raised his hand, smiling. To Earl, to Maya, to Helen, and to stubborn wind. The crowd echoed, lifting their voices into the night. To stubborn wind. The turbines spun above, steady and proud. For once, Dry Mesa's glow matched the ridge's giants, not in size, but in spirit. Later, as the town danced under its new light, Helen leaned toward Earl. You know, stories like this deserve to be shared. People out there need to see what we did here. Earl chuckled. Then you best tell it right. Tell 'em stubborn old men and little girls can still change the world. Helen smiled. I will. The camera of memory panned wide, turbines big and small turning together, stars burning above, LEDs glowing below. A forgotten town now lit by its own hands. Because dignity is power, and power, in Dry Mesa, meant the light that stayed. If you believe experience always beats arrogance, give this video a like. Stories like this deserve to be shared, so subscribe and join us for the next one.